Hi, everyone. Welcome to the broadcast today. We are live streaming, broadcasting from the Our Revolution Texas page today. Welcome, welcome. Those who are joining us this wonderful Saturday morning, we hope that you are well, your family as well, and you guys are enjoying your weekend this Saturday morning. We have an exciting press conference for you tonight. Joining us now will be none other than Merritt, helping to organize the Texas Justice Coalition. That work is being organized to help not just reform, but also change the laws here in Texas and how they directly affect the citizens here in our state. You will hear from several organizations today, leaders in this fight, day and night, trying to make sure that we have equality and justice for all, not just for the wealthy or the few or the privileged. So I am so excited to hear from all of the amazing leaders we have scheduled. We're going to take just a few minutes to let this call build up. If you're joining us from Facebook, welcome. Please introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know what section of Texas you're joining us from. We always like to say in Texas, Texas is 13 states masquerading as one. So we have a lot of ground to cover, y'all, a lot of work to do in this state. And we welcome everyone who's joining us from all over the state. You will hear from leaders working on their efforts to make sure that justice and equality is reached for everyone. We want to wish everyone a happy Black History Month this Saturday, our first Saturday celebrating in February. And we also want to encourage everyone to remember that Black history is every day. So thanks to everyone who's doing that work. Today is just a piece of all of that coalition work being conducted, not just here in Texas, but across the nation. You will hear from legislative bills being focused on in our state, as well as local organizing efforts. All of those groups working so steadfastly, many for decades, years of work. And this is coming to an front now, and we're hopeful that we can begin to push forward with progress here in Texas, as well as across the nation, right, y'all? So thanks again for joining us. We're going to give the call just a few more minutes. If you're joining us from Facebook, make sure that you introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from, what region, whether it be El Paso, Rio Grande. El Paso is like, a 10, 12-hour drive, depending on how many stops you take. So last night we made a funny joke that El Paso is closer to some parts of California than it is to East Texas. That's how big Texas is. So we want to make sure that people from all over the state are recognized, those in the Rio Grande Valley. You'll hear from people from Houston, people you've heard on other Our Revolution calls, and the work they're doing with the Texas Justice Coalition. So thanks to everyone that is beginning this work, helping to organize. If you want to volunteer with these groups, as well as these leaders, if there's a specific topic that you are passionate about, please contact these groups. It will take every one of us to organize this state. So we need your help. We need, support, whether that be monetary or volunteer hours. And again, there's so much dedication here. I can't wait for you to hear from this coalition of organizers across the state. Clayton, how are we looking on the Facebook feed? How is it going as far as the broadcasting?
So the broadcast is live. We are having viewers, and I think it's time for us to get the show on the road. So welcome, everyone. My name is Clayton Tucker. I am the State Director for Our Revolution Texas, and welcome to our Texas Lege Justice Advocacy Coalition press conference. Today, a large, diverse, and expansive coalition of activists, community leaders, and community organizations have come together to make our voices heard. The protest in the summer of last year, sparked by the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Mike Ramos, and so many others, ignited an unprecedented in scale public awakening for the needs to address our state's legacy of racism and social injustices. The simple fact of the matter is that in the great state of Texas, in the friendship state, as our motto proclaims, our justice system is very unfriendly to a large number of our fellow residents, of our own neighbors. Just as house fires and field fires love nothing more than to spread, all of us Texans must recognize that injustice, if not immediately extinguished, can spread just as far and just as fast. Our demands, therefore, are simple. This legislative session must advance common sense criminal justice policy and boldly address the racial and social justice needs of communities across the state. The George Floyd Act must be passed. This bill, put forth by the Texas Legislative Black Caucus, will transform parts of our criminal legal system and has overwhelming support across the state of Texas. However, there's much more that needs to be accomplished. There's a lot of work for us to do to create a better future for all. You will be hearing about just some of those solutions tonight. If you have any questions during this time, please put them in the chat and we will do our best to respond to them or put them on a comment in the live stream. It is my honor to introduce our first speaker, the man who, in my opinion, needs no true introduction, Lee Merritt, a national civil rights attorney and co-founder of Grassroots Law Project. Mr. Merritt, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Clayton, for that introduction. My name is Lee Merritt. As Clayton stated, I am a civil rights attorney. Clayton made reference to this summer and some of the national response that we had to criminal justice reform, beginning with the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, who my office represents. But it has also connected directly to the bulk of my clients, which are right here in the state of Texas. Families like the family of Botham Jean and Jordan Edwards, and Tatiana Jefferson, and Pamela Turner, and most recently Patrick Warren, killed by the deadliest police culture in the modern world, killed right here in Texas. And so here with my organization that I get to serve as co-founder for and legal director of the Grassroots Law Project, we're committed to ending police violence and mass incarceration in Texas. And I'm so excited to be with all these great Texans and to be inducted into the Texan family myself over the past couple of years. And at the Grassroots Law Project, we'll be focusing on specifically changing the parole eligibility standards during the 87th Texas State Legislature. We believe this should be prioritized on behalf of the 250,000 persons incarcerated in Texas prisons and jails. This act will provide, we're championing specifically the Second Chance Bill currently before the Legislative Council, which the Grassroots Law Project had an opportunity to co-author. This act would provide second chances to those who have grown and changed during their period of incarceration. The research has demonstrated that 5 out of 8 people who are incarcerated can go home today. These are populations, including individuals who have become senior citizens in prison, folks who are very close to their time of release, many of whom have served over 20 years. My notes reflect that in Texas, 17,000 people are 50 and older in our prisons. 10,000 of them have already served over 20 years in prison. And it makes no sense for our nation to allow them to die during a pandemic, although these people have demonstrated that they can be fully integrated in our society, become productive members of our society without adding any danger to our community. Research has shown that most so-called criminals or offenders age out of crime by age 30. Younger people deserve a second chance after important brain development and maturity has taken place. And many of our great minds continue to languish in Texas prisons. This act aims to give people an opportunity to have their sentences reduced. If a district attorney brings a petition empowering our district attorneys and our local electorate to increase reentry and offer opportunities to citizens in Texas who are incarcerated, this act would empower our district attorneys to reduce the sentence. And if the court makes a finding that the individual no longer poses a true threat to public safety. We will also be supporting other legislation which will reduce mass incarceration and increase parole eligibility. I want to thank everyone for all the incredible work that has gone into proposing this incredible legislation, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our next speaker, which will be Maggie Luna, who's with the Statewide Leadership Council, a project of the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition. Maggie, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sarah, and I'm so grateful to be here with all of these wonderful organizers this morning. My name is Maggie Luna. I am the Policy Fellow with Texas Criminal Justice Coalition, and I'm on the steering committee for Statewide Leadership Council. And what we are is a group of system impacted people who are working to make change. We have members all across Texas who have been personally impacted by our criminal injustice system. We have all been either inside or touched in some way by what happens in our justice system every single day. We have a legislative agenda that we're working on this session, which is our first and foremost is working on common sense parole. Because as Lee said, there are so many people sitting in prison, and at the beginning of this pandemic, they were eligible for parole or granted for parole and had no way out. So it makes more sense to do that on the front end and have these people ready for parole by the time they come up for eligibility. So we are working on a package that would help TDCJ to do that. And we are also firmly supporting the George Floyd Act. What we saw over the summer and we've been seeing has affected all of our families or somebody that we know, and it just has to stop. And we're also working to help expand non-disclosures on people who do have criminal records. And that would help so many people, not only us in the community, but help us get back to work, have homes. We have people in our statewide leadership council who've been out of the system for years and are still being held accountable for something that they've already done their time for. I personally spent months filling out applications and I kept getting denied. So we would just like to expand the eligibility for non-disclosure. We're working with the Clean Slate Initiative, and we're hoping that there's a package of bills that we're going to be supporting. So we just hope that everybody will gather around and support this grassroots effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Lauren Johnson with the ACLU Texas. Lauren, you have the floor.
Thank you. So my name is Lauren Johnson. I'm a policy advocacy strategist with the ACLU of Texas. And I would really just like to start today by reminding everyone that people are not disposable and everyone deserves a chance to achieve their full potential. Right now, Texas is in the middle of a public health crisis that is bigger than just COVID. And in order to shift our state's priorities towards public health and save money, Texas has to fund community-based solutions to prevent overdoses, reduce criminal justice involvement, and improve access to housing and recovery supports. Right now, Texas spends more than $42 million every year on incarcerating people for possessing small amounts of drugs. Meanwhile, overdose rates have doubled over the last 10 years. The Centers for Disease Control counted the highest number ever recorded in a 12-month period, which is a significant increase of 21% over the last 12 months since the pandemic hit. We don't have to choose between being safe and being fair. We can take important steps towards safer and healthier communities by repealing outdated drug policies that criminalize people who use drugs and invest in the programs that actually help them. Texas should join other states that have safely and effectively reduced penalties for small amounts of drugs and decriminalizing possession of paraphernalia, and instead invest in the things that we know work, things that allow people to rebuild their lives and become successful while helping our communities to thrive. Individual redemption comes through access to resources and opportunities needed to reclaim a life otherwise lost to mistakes and misfortune. It means using effective and evidence-based rehabilitative approaches that are appropriate and proportionate to a person's conduct and circumstances. It means recognizing that rehabilitation is often a rocky road that requires patience and compassion, as well as steady and committed support. This legislative session, we have many opportunities to pass common sense policies that will make Texas better for all of us. Reducing penalties for substance use and paraphernalia and allowing people to succeed without the barriers of a lifetime of collateral consequences are just one small step that we can take to get there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I will be introducing our next speaker, who is Latonya Whittington. She's the founder and director of Cannabis Reform of Houston. Latonya, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, so much for the introduction. And thank you so much for having me and being on this panelist with such wonderful people. I am the executive director for Cannabis Reform in Houston. You can find us on Facebook, CROH/groups. We have over 5,000 members on that organization because that really tells you that people need legalization of cannabis in Texas. Let's go green, Texas. And no, I'm not talking about recycling, nor am I talking about pushing a political party. We, Cannabis Reform in Houston, are pushing our representatives to bring legalization of cannabis to the state of Texas. Legalization of cannabis in the states have always and already have seen results in bright economic tax revenues, new jobs, and investment opportunities. Furthermore, when looking at it from a micro perspective, Texas counties would save so much money from legalizing marijuana, since possession convictions cost taxpayers millions of dollars that could otherwise go towards the communities that serve our states and the things that you guys are doing today. Now, people are eager to invest in cannabis with an emerging U.S. market that creates hundreds of billions of dollars in the business revenue. Cannabis was considered an essential business during this pandemic. Medical and recreational users of cannabis increased their purchases in March in 2020. So we know that was when the pandemic came and people were searching for a way to deal with people dying, change of lifestyle. So instead of taking pills that could kill your body and your organs, they went to something natural, and that is cannabis. Now, lastly, not least, the government and the states, they save money from legal cannabis by not arresting or incarcerating individuals. Court hearings, community supervision, lab testing, and appointing attorneys, that all costs money. And some of us have experienced that. Now, I want to quote something from a representative. His name is, he's a former Texas representative, David Simpson, and he said something that was very important. Current marijuana policies are not based on science or sound evidence, but rather misinformed information for people who do not understand and the fear of cannabis. You know, people who don't know the healing mechanism that cannabis has. Now, this is very important, Texans who fight for legalization. Hear me now. The 87 Texas legislation is underway right now. It ends May the 25th. This is our time to get in touch with our representatives and senators and let them know that you want legalization of cannabis. Under normal circumstances, this process is intense and implications from the pandemic have complicated this even more. You know, we can't go up there and lobby and testify as others are for their bills. People are suffering and have developed or intensified mental illnesses, and cannabis has seemed to help thousands of people. It is natural, it cures, and many want to take that route. There has always been an intersection of cannabis and race. Now, we all know that. The percentage of Blacks to be arrested for cannabis is the highest in all races. That is an unjust that needs to be examined in Texas and America alone. There must be a change in Texas. 2021 should be our year. We have fought for this a long time, people, and it is time out for stinking thinking. Stop being the judge for what you think is right for our lives. I know that is right for my life, and I know that is right for others who needs this. I can make my own decisions. And natural cannabis saved my life. I choose life. Free the weed in Texas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Latonya. So our next speaker was unfortunately unable to join us, but I would like to quickly share his story. His name is Garrett Galloway. He's going to share the story of his brother, Marvin Guy. So Marvin has been in the Bell County Jail for nearly 6.5, well, actually almost 7 years at this point, held in Bell County Jail without trial because of a botched no-knock raid. No-knock raids are unconstitutional. They go against our civil rights, and they need to be abolished in the state of Texas because they're horribly misused. And thankfully there are bills in the Texas House and in the Texas Senate that will abolish no-knock raids. So, our hearts go out to Marvin Guy and his family. He's still in jail, and we will be doing what we can to really push and advocate for abolishing the system of no-knock raids here in the state of Texas. And with that, I'll pass it to Sarah to introduce our next guest.
Thank you, Clayton. I am introducing our next speaker, which will be David Johnson, who's with Grassroots Leadership and the Coalition to Abolish Slavery, Texas. David, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Hey, everyone. My name is David Johnson. My pronouns are he, him, his. And I just want to have a conversation about slavery. So I'm sure that many of you think that slavery was abolished. I know the 13th Amendment, 1865, all of that wonderful stuff, but that's not true. It was not abolished. It was simply reclassified and allowed as a form of punishment. Now, the problem with this is that slavery is the original act of dehumanization in this country. And the fact that it is the foundation to this nation should really make clear to everyone how we are at a place today where we so often lack humanity in the way with which we engage with one another. So it's time that we divorce ourselves completely from our legacy of harm and white supremacy and fully abolish slavery in every form, with no exception, from the state of Texas to start, but leading into the entire country. Because there is no such thing as moving on in a way that is focused on health and in a way that centers the community in a transformative way until we have completely abolished our relationship with the dehumanization and the objectification of human bodies. Because today slavery has gone far beyond its original roots in the oppression and destruction of Black identity. It has been spread throughout. It is the reason that everyone who is undocumented has to hide in fear of ICE. It is the reason that individuals are harassed according to race or gender identity or sexuality, harassed and assaulted, and at times killed in prison. Because you see, once you have trained a society and a culture to cease to recognize the spirit, the indomitable soul, and the lack of disposability in every human being, well, then each and every one of us continues to embrace our heritage of slavery. If you think this doesn't affect you, perhaps you need to have a long talk with yourself and take a long look in the mirror and determine what it is you really believe. I ask that on behalf of the Coalition to Abolish Slavery Texas and Grassroots Leadership, not only that you support every legislative agenda item named in this lovely news conference, but I ask that you demand not only of yourself and your neighbors and your community members, but of your place of employment, your place of worship, your representatives at state, federal, and local levels, your school board. Demand it of your parents and your children to stand up, support House Joint Resolution 51, and say slavery is never okay. Slavery is always evil. It is an absolute evil, and as such, it must be abolished absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Our next speaker is Angela Johnson with the Texas Organizing Project. Angela, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be a part of the digital press conference with so many powerful advocates for the justice system. Of course, my name is Angela Johnson. I'm a member of the Texas Organizing Project, also known as TOP, here in Houston. I'm an active part of our Right to Justice campaign. TOP organizes Black and Latino communities in Dallas, Harris, and Bexar counties with the goal of transforming Texas into a state where working people of color have the power and representation they deserve. I'm also a mother of an incarcerated son, and I have experienced firsthand the confusion, the pain, and the sorrow of the justice system inflicts on families of color like mine. It boils down to this: members of our community shouldn't have to endure sitting in jail simply because they cannot afford to post a bond. No matter how you look at it, it's just wrong. The cash bail system disproportionately keeps Black and Latino people behind bars, taking this devastating toll on our families and our neighborhoods year after year. It's agonizing and its oppressive system feeds off of our suffering, keeping many of our families in a vicious cycle of poverty. It does not have to be this way. Although transforming change to our bail system is attainable here in Texas, but we have to fight for it. That's why I'm happy to see Senator Whitmire champion our legislative measure that will get us one step closer to where we need to be on the bail reform here in Texas. It's smart policy, it's humane policy, it's radical justice. The status quo is unacceptable in each way. We are not settling for it. We're fighting for the justice our community so desperately needs and deserves. Now let's make sure that we do what we can do and see the passage of this bill through. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. Our next speaker is Jorge Renaud with Latino Justice. Jorge, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. My name is Jorge Rene, and I am the Southwest Region Director for Policy and Advocacy, Latino Justice. At Latino Justice, we have three foundational concepts. The first is that no human being is disposable, none. The second is that punishment and incarceration aren't conducive to the healing of individuals or communities and must be replaced by transformative and restorative justice. And the third is that communities of color have borne the brunt of our current criminal legal system, and that any movement to build a new system must center Black lives. Latino Justice will be focusing its efforts this session on the back end of our carceral system, specifically in the areas of parole and supervision after release from prison. The Board of Pardons and Paroles and TDCJ have failed miserably in their responsibilities toward incarcerated individuals, their families, and all Texans by allowing voting members to express their personal biases and abuse their discretion by denying parole on purely subjective reasons to individuals who are eminently qualified for release. In addition, the board and TDCJ's half-hearted response to the pandemic, their unwillingness to reinstate in-person visitation, and the deaths of 9 individuals already granted parole has reaffirmed the need for true transformation of the prison and parole system. So we'll be focusing on the following areas. We're filing legislation that will require that the 7 members of the board have educational and personal histories that enable them to perform their duties in a timely and responsible fashion. There are currently no educational requirements for anyone appointed to serve on the board, no required knowledge of the system that contribute to over-incarceration, and no required knowledge of the best practices and services currently necessary to support individuals who are being released. We're filing legislation that will require TDCJ to be completely transparent and allow full access to the programs that are required by individuals who granted parole. Currently, anybody asking for details of programming must file a request under the Open Records Act. And those barriers prevent Texans from accessing details to programs that the board and TDCJ insist are crucial. That policy also discourages any meaningful evaluation of programs that individuals are literally dying to attend. Finally, we're filing legislation that will cap post-release supervision at 10 years. There are currently over 2,000 people in Texas who've been on parole over 10 years, costing millions of dollars that could be diverted to supervision and services offered to those just released, when the risk of recidivism is much higher. Latino Justice is committed to supporting legislation that affirms the dignity of all people, regardless of crime of conviction. We will oppose any enhancement, and we will oppose any legislation that excludes individuals due to their crime. Finally, Latino Justice fully supports the George Floyd Act, the decriminalization of all drugs, and any effort to implement harm reduction and a behavioral health approach to addiction. Thank you all for being here. We'll see you all down the road.
Thank you, Jorge. Our next speaker is Chris Harris with Texas Appleseed. Chris, you have the floor.
Great, thank you so much. Really appreciate being able to share this space with so many amazing people, advocates, activists, and organizers. We at Texas Appleseed work on economic and social justice in many areas. I'm here today to talk, of course, about criminal justice. Due to the ongoing and pervasive racial and economic disparities that literally are in every single part of the criminal justice system, it is our duty to minimize how much that system is able to pull people into it, as well as the impacts that people face once brought into it and once on the other side of it. So I'm here to talk about three particular things that we're supporting towards that effort. The first is clean slate legislation for folks who have served time or even just been arrested for offenses. Currently, limitations on access to record sealing and expungement in Texas leave millions facing a lifelong discrimination in housing, in employment, as well as in education. The issue is twofold. One is that it's very difficult to manage the system itself, as well as the fact that there are limits on eligibility to those who have access to these things. And so there are a variety of bills which Coalition here in Texas will be supporting, aimed at expanding eligibility for record sealing and expungement, shortening wait times, as well as on automating the process and limiting the fines and fees that people face when they try to access that process. Secondarily, I want to talk about Sandra Bland bill. It has been, this will mark 6 years this July since Sandra Bland died in the Waller County Jail following her arrest, stemming from failure to signal a lane change. For the last few cycles, many of us have attempted to restrict police authority to arrest in situations where the maximum penalty for the offense, even if the person is found guilty, would be a fine. This language, this is contained within the George Floyd Act. There's also a separate bill which we'll be supporting this session. Last session, it died on the final day in the House by 2 votes. The session before was pulled out in the Senate. So we're going to continue to keep pushing this bill. We owe it to her. The famous phrase that's come from and out of Sandra Bland activism is that she still speaks, and she does still speak, and we will continue to push for those reforms for as long as we can. The final thing is driver's licenses. Many are aware that of the big victory last session, that was the repeal of the driver responsibility program. This was a many session effort involving many advocates and lawmakers through years. It lifted suspensions for over 1 million drivers in Texas that kept them from driving. It, with the stroke of a pen, wiped away over $2 billion in debt, a major victory. However, what we've seen in the data since that September 1st of 2019 went out into effect is that hundreds of thousands of Texans continue to be impacted by another program called the Failure to Appear program, also known as the Omnibase program. This program puts holds on people's driver's licenses for unpaid fines and fees, overwhelmingly stemming from traffic violations and Class C violations used in municipal courts and justice of the peace courts. We are attempting to reform this program to ensure that folks that do show up, that get on a payment plan, that get on a community service plan, which often can take years to complete, are able to get their holds lifted and get back to driving, get back to school, get back to taking their kids to school, get back to work. And so again, we hope for support on all three of these initiatives, again, aimed at limiting people being pulled into the criminal legal system, again, rife with racial and economic disparities, and then limiting the impacts that keep people from opportunity, that keep people from work, and that keep people from their families here in Texas. So thank you again very much for the time, and really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Chris. Our next speaker is Ananda Thomas. She's the Deputy Director for Fix SAPD. Ananda, you have the floor.
Thank you. So my name is Ananda Thomas. I'm the Deputy Director of Fix SAPD. We are a nonprofit focused on removing barriers to police discipline through the repeal of chapters 143 and 174 in our community. But the George Floyd Act also does include addressing police discipline, which is why we are supporting it. Passage of this bill will mandate every city to have a civil service commission, whether they're operating under meet and confer, collective bargaining, or neither one. More importantly, each commission will be responsible for putting a clearly defined progressive disciplinary matrix out there. That means a formal schedule for disciplinary actions, which is not something that exists in Texas. To break it down, this means that the more egregious the misconduct or the action, the more severe the punishment. The more infractions on an officer's disciplinary record, the more severe the punishment. It seems simple, it seems common sense, but this is not currently the reality of police discipline in Texas. Here's one of the most important parts. Disciplinary records must be included when making disciplinary decisions for an officer. This is not the case, meaning that it is impossible to establish a pattern of behavior when deciding if an officer should stay on the force or not. Need I remind everyone here that many officers that have taken the lives of our fellow Texans have had a history of infractions and complaints on their record, but we're still allowed to patrol our streets and eventually murder one of our loved ones. Now, tied to this is also inclusion of disciplinary records when an officer is appealing, whatever this decision is. Now, officers appeal through arbitration, sometimes civil service commission, but right now it is not currently part of that arbitrator or decision maker's job to include an officer's past disciplinary record. So this means that we have officers that are fired multiple times. Lieutenant Lee Rakin here in San Antonio fired a total of 6 times before he was gone. Any arbitrator would have said, all right, after the second firing, there must clearly be a problem. You shouldn't be on our force. Any citizen does not want that officer on their force. No chief of police wants them on the force. But that is not currently the system right now. We can change that with the George Floyd Act and create the disciplinary matrix that we need to protect citizens, to protect good officers, to protect our community, and stop some of these murders before they happen from bad officers that do not follow the law and are allowed to get away through the disciplinary barriers that our system has set up. We must fire bad officers. We must clearly define police discipline. We must reinforce police accountability for all of us. So we must pass the George Floyd Act. Please, 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 I encourage everybody to get involved on supporting this important legislation. Thank you.
So I definitely want to thank all of our speakers today. And I really want to thank everyone who's joined in, who listened through Facebook Live and through Zoom. We really appreciate y'all. I do want to quickly thank all of our coalition partners in this. These partners include organizations such as the Austin Justice Coalition, Texas Fair Defense Project, Texas Criminal Justice Coalition, ACLU of Texas, Cannabis Reform of Houston and Texas, Justice for Marvin Gaye, Coalition to Abolish Slavery, Texas, the Grassroots Leadership, Just Liberty, Texas Appleseed, Fix SAPD, Latino Justice, Sierra Club, the Grassroots Law Project, Indivisible, and Our Revolution. These are really good organizations. So if you are listening and you want to be involved, you want to take the next step of really pressuring our Texas government to do the right thing, I encourage you to reach out to any one of these organizations. They're all great. They will help get you set up, because this is going to take a collective effort. It's going to take us working together to create the pressure that will be needed to force movement on the House floor and the Texas State Senate floor. So again, these are all great groups. I encourage everyone to get involved with any of them. And together we will achieve what we need to achieve: a better and more just future for every single resident in the state of Texas. Thank you all. Y'all have a good Saturday.